So really see where you want to be. Are you looking to go from being a poor or average school in terms of your program to being a good program? If that's the case, the single biggest thing you want to do on the distance front is focus on recruiting and trying to get more athletes. And I'm going to talk about how to do that in a setting here momentarily. But if you're already a pretty good established program and you're trying to become a great program and you contend at the state level, then really what you're focusing on is using your athletes in the right way and coaching them up so there's a lot of improvement. Finally, if you're trying to go from a state contending program to a national contending program, your goals are entirely different, and that's really focused on inspiring kids to work really hard, creating a culture of success, and really trying to get to that next level. That's a different session. That's not today. I want to focus really on recruiting and discerning. So our priorities that we're going to have, and I apologize, I don't have my clicker, so I keep looking over here. We're going to recruit, discern, and train. Focus on getting as many athletes on the team as possible, discern how to use those athletes best, and then train those athletes to their full potential as well. You know, in the end, if you get to the point where motivation becomes the biggest factor for the success of your program, you'll have to recognize you can never stop doing these first three things. So any successful program has to focus on those first pieces. So what I know about recruiting, I learned from this guy right here. This is Joe Newton from York, Illinois. He had a team from a school, I think about 1,800 total students. He had about 200 boys on his cross-country and track team. That is an incredible amount of turnout. It's not possible in every school. In my first time at Berkmar, I had 17 guys on our cross-country team. By our second year, we had 35 guys on the cross-country team. And then we grow from there. So recruiting is incredibly important. At Marist, we went from around 85 kids to around 150 kids, both for cross-country and for track and field. We have 800 kids in the school. So it says something about what you're trying to create if you can get that number of kids to come out. And once you have those kids out, you can do almost anything. So really, really important to try to get people out. So first step I always do in terms of recruiting, whether it's for sprints, jumps, whatever happens to be distance, is get as many freshmen and sophomores out as possible. If you start them when they're young, you have greater hope of them carrying through and buying into that program. They're also less likely to be fully vested in something else, whatever that extracurricular activity happens to be. So big, big thing right there to focus on. 2, convince them to bring out their friends. Even if the athlete is the slowest kid on your team, he might have fast friends, or she might have fast friends. And the more people are out there, the more they're with their friends, the more enjoyment they're going to have with the activity, the more likely they are to keep doing it, and more likely they are to improve. So pulling in people, hey, you got 3 people you eat lunch with every day, what are they doing? So the thing I always ask kids, what are you doing this fall? And if the answer is nothing, say, come join cross country, come be a part of what we're doing. What are you doing this spring? You're not on the soccer team, you're not playing baseball, come join track, be a part of what we're doing. And just asking people randomly all the time to get them out there is a big piece. This is high school or middle school in some cases. You got to make it fun. And if you're not having fun, the kids aren't having fun. And there are a wide variety of ways to try to make this experience enjoyable. But if it's not fun, kids aren't going to do it. So you got to find ways to play games, find ways to have cheap popsicles after practice sometimes, find ways to give out goofy awards, whatever those are going to be, you're going to get more kids out to that program, and you're going to be able to grow it from there. You also got to hold kids accountable. I think this is something that is forgotten today, but kids like structure. Kids like knowing where they're supposed to be. Kids like knowing that someone's looking after them. So if you don't follow up with them when they miss a practice, they realize it's not all that important. You're not taking this seriously. They're not going to take it seriously. So you have to hold them to high expectations, and those kids will rise to that. Hold them accountable for being on time. Hold them accountable for being at practices. And then I think it's incredibly important to treat all of your athletes equally. Whether they are the fastest kid on the team or the slowest kid on the team, they recognize that they are important. And that means those folks are more likely to buy in over time. This is a mistake I made in my own career early on. I got this fast girl, I need to focus on her. Well, guess what? I just alienated the 8 other girls on my team because now I have a prima donna. when if I treated them all fairly and equally, focused on all their development, they're all going to buy in. And that talented kid may not end up being your best athlete in 2 or 3 years. In line with that, you got to celebrate all accomplishments, both individual and on the team. If someone went from being a 75-second quarter miler to a 71-second quarter miler, you gotta celebrate that. And if someone went from being a 60-second quarter miler to a 59-second quarter miler, you gotta celebrate that, because they're both major accomplishments. Once again, you never know how people are going to turn out. There was an article that just came out this week in Runner's World about an athlete from North Central College in Illinois. His PR as a freshman in cross country was 20:53 for 3 miles. So that's about a 21:35K for the guy. He just ran 13:51 for a 5K to set the Division III national record. 8 years later. You just don't know who it's going to be. If that coach had ignored this kid with no hope, who may have been 40th on his team as a freshman, he may not have stuck it out. But now he's a national record holder. So celebrate those accomplishments. When that kid ran 20:53, let's acknowledge it. And it could be as simple as, hey, you PR'd, here's a Jolly Rancher. And I'll give out something super cheap, something not all that, important, but for that child, it means something when you call it out. And it makes for a great bus ride home if you guys pause and you clap for whoever just, ran their PRs or threw the farthest or whatever it happened to be. But if you do that, these kids will feel successful, that team will look successful, and it's going to start recruiting itself. Let's go ahead and pause for a second here and reflect on this idea of recruitment. The first thing you need to do is identify your goals. See where you're at in this process, and see if recruiting is your top priority, see if training and utilizing athletes better is your top priority. But really assess what you're already doing, assess where you're already at, be realistic with your program, and then start where you are and focus on getting better. Second thing is just get your team as big as possible. And there are issues that come with this, logistics. When you go from 1 bus to 2 buses, it's hard. When you have 50 kids maybe for 1 coach, it's hard, but these are good problems to have. And don't let that prevent you from trying to pull in as many kids as you can get. Even if it is going from 8 to 12, you're going to be that much better as a program. Jim Collins said that great vision without great people is irrelevant. Meaning you can have this idea of having this incredible team, but if you don't have anyone out there, you're just not going to be going places. So you've got to work hard to get those kids out as much as possible. Now, once you have a kid out for that program, you have to discern where they belong. We spoke earlier in the presentations about someone who wants to run an 800 and a mile, but maybe also wants to try the hurdles, right? So how do we do this? Well, I want you to first think and realistically ask yourself, can I support year-round training? Okay? And this is important to me because what I'm going to talk about for the most part today is developing a middle distance program for track and field, because a lot of small schools have a hard time supporting a year-round training program. And a lot of the workouts I'm going to talk about are from a single season perspective, not from a year-round perspective. If you have questions about that stuff, I'll be happy to address it later, particularly for more advanced athletes. But I'm looking at it from I have kids coming out in January, I have until May to get them to be the best they can be. In that situation, what I typically do is focus on the 800 and the mile. The training overlaps a lot. I can squeeze some 4x4 participation out of them as well. And it gives me a chance to maximize the number of points I can get based on the amount of work we can put in. The 3,200 meter at the high school level, even from single A on up to about 4A, it's going to require year-round training to be at a high level. So let's figure out where we can capitalize on genetics, capitalize on some of the speed kids are already bringing, and then use that to maximize points. Yeah, we want kids' development, but I also know we're interested in trying to win meets and score points. So these are things that we need to be considering. Now, with that being said, you still want to enter kids in the 2 mile because it's a chance to score points. I'm never going to say don't enter kids in the 2 mile, but it's harder to convince someone who's never been a distance runner to do 8 laps around the track, because it's hard to convince someone who is a distance runner to do 8 laps around the track. So for me, let's focus on middle distance and work on maximizing our points. So how do we do that? Well, let's figure this out. I'm not sure if anyone knows who this is. No, probably not. So this is Devin Dixon. He ran for Eagles Landing High School. This is a 5A school currently in Henry County, Georgia. He's an incredibly fast runner. Okay, in fact, his high school PR is 46.9 for the 400 meters. That is mind-blowingly fast for someone like me. Now, what's interesting to note about Devin Dixon, and what most people don't know about him, and he is the state record holder in the 800 as well. He's run 149 for the 800. He also ran 422 for the mile, and he ran top 10 cross-country time at state with 16:10. So he was actually at an all-metro banquet as a cross-country runner, even though he's a 46.9 400-meter runner. Now, I can believe that there's only a handful of coaches who would ever take a kid who can run this fast and say, try something longer. Or take a kid like this fast and say, maybe cross-country is for you. But guess what? Over the course of his career, his 400s got faster and his 800s got faster as he ran cross-country, as he ran the mile. And currently today, he is the NCAA indoor track and field record holder for the 800 meters for American-born athletes. That's an incredible thing. But most people look at this and they go, put him on the 4x1. Let's have him run the 2 and the 4, we're done. But he's the state record holder in the 8 because of the foresight that his coach brought to this. So oftentimes, it's incredibly important to consider that an athlete might be better from a longer perspective. And from a points perspective, with most schools being in AA or 5A here for APS, you got to look at the sweet spot of where's the easiest place to score. And if you look at this right here with the young ladies, 45 to 49 and 300 hurdles, that requires some talent, some hard work, some technical know-how. 400 meters scores in AA, 57 to 60. But in the 800, 224 to 236 is substantially slower than a 57 to 60 on equivalency charts. Mm-hmm. Now, in 5A for the young ladies, I'll note this 212 was exceptional because of an athlete from Alexander High School who skewed that. The bulk of the points were around 220. Much easier than getting a girl in 56 seconds in that 400 meters. For the gentlemen, same thing here. If you look, 39 to 41 in the 400 hurdles, or 300 hurdles, 49 to 51 in the 400. But down here, I can score real points at the state meet with a kid running 205, 206, 207 point. That's not an insurmountable task. Even in 5A, it's easier to run a 158 than just to run a 48. So if we're talking about this from a real coaching perspective of trying to score points, it makes sense to steer kids towards the 800. And in some cases, if you look down here in AA, to steer young ladies towards a mile or 2 mile, or to steer young men towards a mile. My philosophy of coaching is always to push kids towards technical events and push kids towards longer events because you can out-coach and you can outwork your competition. I've been in situations where athletes have shown up, I've never seen them before, and guess what? They were fast. And they were just pulled from a baseball team or pulled from a soccer team, and all of a sudden, your 200 runner, who worked really hard to drop half of a second over the course of that season, is left at home. But if we have an opportunity to outwork, opportunity to outcoach, that's the direction you want to steer your team, and you want to try to steer your athletes. So what should you be looking for in this athlete that may be the 200 or 400 meter runner that you want to push to the 8 and to the 16? Well, for me, it depends on the size of your team. It's typically someone who is your 3rd through 6th best quarter miler. And this might be more of a situation for a 5A school than for a 2A school. But if I have a gentleman who's running between 52 and 55 in the 400, he's not going to score at state in that time. Or a young lady running 60 to 64, I'm going to push them instead towards that 800 meter range. Additionally, if they're faster, sometimes that's even better. But it's going to be a hard sell on your number 1 runner to try something different. So what does this mean? If I look at this, if I have a young man who's well trained and his PR is 56 in the 400, he can probably run about a 203 in the 8 if he's well trained. That can score points. 56 is 7 seconds away from scoring points or 5 seconds away from scoring points in that 400 meters. And for a young lady, a 64 well trained can be a 222. So there's real hope for long-term potential and long-term growth. I tend to look for athletes, though, that have a slighter build than other 400 runners. The 400 and the 800 can be a lot of overlap in terms of the amount of muscle mass people carry. So a strength-based 400-meter runner who's built like a classic sprinter, maybe not the athlete to pull forward, but someone like Devin Dixon, who I showed earlier, long, lean, skinny, that's the person I'd be more likely to pull towards the middle distances. I also, and this is kind of a stereotype, I look for the smartest kid around. The type A personality, the one who always does their homework, the one who turns in everything on time. Those athletes might be more apt to deal with the structure that's required in a middle distance program. And of course, a fearlessness. The second half of an 800 can be frightening. The third lap of a mile is a scary prospect. But if you have that kid who's a little bit crazy and they're not already a pole vaulter, then you might want to consider asking them to try something in the middle distances. So how do I convince the athlete? Because almost always they've started off as a sprinter and you're trying to convince them to try something different. So for me, the first thing is always, it's going to help you in the 400. You do a little bit more work, your 400 gets better. And this is the truth for most people. So I think that's a big selling point, and oftentimes they buy in. I always play the team card, okay? Points for the team. The team needs you to do this. Your friends need you to do this. We're better because of this. This is how you can contribute. Kids want to feel like they're important. They want to feel like they're contributing to the larger good. If you do that, they're likely to buy in. The scholarship. When I was at Berkmar, we had some incredible sprinters. We had some so-so distance runners, and many of our distance runners found scholarships to states or to schools in the state of Georgia and beyond, but a lot of our sprinters did not. Particularly, depending on your school population, depending on what schools are typically looking for, I know there's always coaches looking for middle distance runners because of how flexible they can be, because they know they can coach them up. They can help in a 4, in an 8, and in a relay, maybe grow to become a 1,500-meter runner. So a lot of flexibility there. But I always tell them, if we're going to try it, you got to try it twice. Try it once, you just learn that you don't like it. You learn that it hurts. But if you try it twice, you will see remarkable improvement just from the act of racing that event a second time. And all of a sudden, hey, whoa, I've done this and I'm 2 seconds faster already. What if I work hard at this? And then all of a sudden they start to fall in love with this. So once again, let's pause and reflect here for a second. Important step would be to identify which athletes have the right attitude and disposition and perhaps talent for these middle distances or distance races. Consider where they might fit in on the team. Second thing you want to be able to do is convince them to focus or to try it twice. If we've got this down, you're likely to find some kids to fill out this hole in your track team. Brother Colm saw me in high school when I was still doing the 400 and 200. He decided for me to join his club, and we've been training for 1 month. That is when he saw me, and he thought I could do a good 800. David Rudisha is the world record holder in the 800 meters. He started as a sprinter. So once again, it comes with a coach taking the right athlete and convincing them that this is where their future lies. So how do I take this athlete, who is not a year-round distance runner, and try to build them into a middle distance runner? This is where the coaching comes into play. And as part of this, I provide some general principles on how to approach the coaching. First principle is consistency. The very most important thing you can do is get an athlete training every day. If you're only going to see them twice a week, they're not going to get any better. And if you train them really hard for 1 week and they're injured for a week, they're not going to get much better. So you've got to find a way to sustainably and consistently get those athletes working out and improving. So more than any philosophy, more than any single workout, consistent training with a new runner, they're going to improve. I don't care what your methodology is. They're going to get better. 2, you're going to have to individualize it. Different kids come with different fitness. I can't take all 10 of my runners and throw them in the same workout. I'll show you how to do that here momentarily. Thirdly, it's got to be progressive. As we saw in the strength and conditioning video, you have to build in a structure of additional training, of more stimulus, of what they call overload. If we do that, you're going to get better. In this case, I want to emphasize aerobic progression because the longer the event, the more aerobic it's going to be. So you need to be inclusive of aerobic training and building towards volume in the number of repetitions that one has. If I start off with a brand new athlete and I say, we're doing mile repeats today, I'm going to lose that athlete. So how can I get the same training stimulus, but look at it through a perspective of short, familiar reps? That's how you're going to have them stick with it. It's going to be more digestible, and it gives you more flexibility to individualize as a coach. So it's important to keep things as familiar as you can, but steer towards it being aerobic. Rest and recovery. You're not going to get better if you are not focusing on rest and recovery. As we heard in the nutrition speech, it's incredibly important that you do your training, but you actually get better when you're recovering. So if you don't build this in, you're not going to be at your best. And if your workouts are so difficult that you're peeling the kid up off the track on a daily basis, they're not going to have anything left for races. An undertrained athlete who's healthy at the end of the season is better than an overtrained athlete who's unable to race. So always err on the side of being conservative and underdoing it. One good lesson would say is every workout, be able to finish knowing you can do at least 1 or 2 more reps. I don't care what the repetitions are. I don't care how long it is. You should be able to do another mile. You should be able to do 2 more 400s. That's a good time to stop, particularly with the new athlete. And note on this, if you have a race that week, you can use that to replace that hard workout that week. Races are the best workout and the most specific workout that we do. So factor that in. So if you're thinking 2 or 3 workouts a week, if you have 2 races this week, maybe that means you do 1 workout this week, or perhaps even no workouts this week, which is highly controversial, and it often works. So always err on the side of less is more. My personal philosophy is that in the 400 and 800, particularly at the high school level, it's important to race often if you're given adequate rest. If you look at some of the best 800-meter runners in a collegiate setting, they're going to race an 800 almost every week from early January all the way into June, and they consistently improve. And with young athletes, they need to practice the skill of racing. This isn't a 5K. It's not going to take them 4 or 5 days sometimes to recover. Try to get them the opportunity to practice it, to build confidence, to learn the skill of racing. So for me, for new athletes, I aim for 6 to 8 half miles in a year, plus always doing a 4x4. That's how I would approach that. And if they're going to be a miler for me, at least 3 to 5 miles, and the 4x4 if I can ever make that work for a high school setting. It makes me sad when I see a kid get thrown into the mile for the first time at region. They're not going to be at their best. So you've got to give them a chance to practice that skill. So how do I approach just this progressive training that I was alluding to? And for this new athlete, I believe in using a multi-pace training system. And that means that I have about 4 to 5 paces that I work with, and I try to work with that in about a 2-week block of time. So some abbreviations that I'll have up here. I have date pace and goal pace. And as you become more skilled, you can play with these. But for most of the time, I work with date pace. What is your current 400 time in fitness? What's your current mile time in fitness? And that might change over time, and you adjust that throughout the season. And as I said, as you become more advanced, or the athlete becomes more advanced, goal pace becomes more of a concern for you. But these date paces and race distance fitnesses that I'll show you loosely correlate to some of the energy systems and thresholds of the body. And when you could do VO2 max testing or lactate testing or all these other complexities at a collegiate or professional level, for high school kids, the 2 mile is about your VO2 max. And the mile is about what we call like a repetition pace. So there's correlations between the race distances and different ways your body uses energy. So for us, it simplifies it, and we don't have to make it more complicated than it is. Some coaches will tell you, I want to use multiple paces in a day. We're going to do some stuff at mile pace, some stuff at 400 pace. Other coaches say, I work 1 workout a day. We're going to do 8 200s at 800 pace. That's up to you to think about and to play with as you know your athletes and as you develop your own philosophy. But nonetheless, you want to use these paces in general once a week per 2-week block. Once every 2 weeks. So what are the pace ranges I work with for this type of athlete? I work with around 400 meter date pace. So do a time trial, see what that athlete is, work with that. If it's 60 seconds for a 400, I can use that and know that it's 30 seconds for a 200, 15 for a 100, etc. I typically work with an 800 meter pace from their goal pace, which I may not even know what that is, all the way down to their date pace plus around 4 seconds, depending on how new they are. But I use around 800 meter pace for workouts. I use around mile race pace for workouts. Typically from around my date pace, but a little bit faster to my date pace plus around 8 seconds. So in each of these situations, it's approximately mile pace. You don't have to overthink it, particularly with a new athlete. And then finally, I use around 2 mile pace. For an untrained speed side athlete, 2 mile pace is going to be a threshold. And I'm going to abbreviate this as T. For a highly trained year-round athlete, it's going to be closer to 5K pace. But I'm going to just call this T pace that we're working with here for our intents and purposes. Because your kid's probably not going to race a 2 mile, I would probably put in a mile pace but about plus 40 seconds or so. And that's what I will use for this T pace. Okay? So looking at this right now, the last pace I need to add in is easy pace. Frankly, I usually don't have to tell my kids easy pace. They figure it out. But you might have a kid that likes to run hard all the time, and I would slow them down and be about 1600 meter pace plus 2.5 to 3.5 minutes. But most kids naturally are going to go slow enough. And if they're going so slow, then once again, I have a range to be able to give them to work with during this time frame. Now, going forward here, if I'm lucky enough to get a kid before, I think track and field starts in Georgia around MLK Day, I'm going to try to do some general preseason conditioning. And this doesn't have to be complicated. This is everything from easy running and strides, push-ups, sit-ups, any of that type of activity. But you're not always guaranteed to get that, so I'm not going to worry about that too much, and know that pretty much anything is better than nothing. But I'm assuming you're going to get a kid out for the very first day that you haven't seen since either last track season or you're meeting them for the very first time. So I take for the first 6 weeks, once again with the assumption that this is a first-time middle distance runner from the speed or sprint side, not a year-round cross-country runner, distance athlete. I typically will try to do some time trials early on, and I'll use those to replace a workout, and that gives me some date paces that I can work with. Usually a mile and usually a 400. If you have the opportunities to do more, go ahead and do more. But I'm going to use those early on to see where I'm at. And as I've said before, in generally a 2-week block, I'm going to touch on each of those paces. I will have 1 long run and as many easy days as I can basically fit in, with reason. At least 1 day off. So just keeping it simple. That means you should have 1 day it's around 400 pace, 1 day around 800 meter pace, 1 day around mile pace, 1 day around that T pace, 1 long day, and then the rest is easy. So really you're talking about 4 workouts and a long run, or a time trial to replace one of those. So here's what a typical progression would look like during the first 6 weeks, if I've already got an assessment of where people are currently at. Now the point being here though is, as I said early on, these are very manageable and familiar distances to a former sprint athlete or a speed side athlete. I'm not taking someone out and saying we're going to do 10 miles today. I'm not taking someone out and saying we're going to just hit 12 400s today. If I say, look, we're going to do some 100s at 400 meter pace, that's going to be pretty easy. And that's what we want. We want something that's manageable, something you can build on, something you can find success with. And for someone who hasn't done training in the off-season, something they're not going to get hurt from. But where we're going to see some real gains is not necessarily from the 8 100s, it's for this kid doing 300-meter jog rests. They're getting 2 miles of running in here, and that kid may have never run 2 miles in their life. All of a sudden, in manageable chunks, we're starting to see some of that aerobic development starting while getting some of this neuromuscular stimulus. A lot of your early gains come from coordination. That's where we're going to see a lot of this early improvement. And then when the workouts get harder, they're going to start to see real physiological adaptations. So what am I playing with generally? I'm generally playing with the length of the interval, going from 100 to 150 to 200. Notice the total volume is not terribly different here, okay? 800 meters total, 900 meters total, and here we have around 1,200 meters total. But I'm also increasing the amount of rest. So I might do this as my first workout of the first week, my first workout of the third week, my first workout of the fifth week, just to introduce them to this and get them used to it. Similarly, if I'm working with an 800 meter pace, this is of course going to be much slower than the 400 pace. My volume is going to start off higher, but still very understandable chunks of distance. Nothing intimidating early on. 100s, 150s, and 200s. But my volume, 1,200 meters, around 1,250, and here we have around 1,600 total meters. So once again, though, slower paces, and notice the rest gets shorter. So we're essentially still keeping a good aerobic component with what we're doing. We're introducing manageable workouts that can find success, and these kids are going to get better. Thirdly, with our 1,600 meter progression here, notice our rests are substantially shorter. And that's because initially our paces are much slower. Okay, this would be a fartlek in a cross-country runner. Okay, this would be the equivalent of something like 30 seconds on, or 20 seconds on, 40 seconds off, or 30 seconds on and 40 seconds off, something along those lines. But this is all about coordination. This is all about getting us moving, building our volume, building confidence. And the T-pace, which is the slowest of the paces, and early on in the season, this might be unbelievably slow. We're just really trying to focus on getting volume in and becoming comfortable at these paces. So for an athlete who might run 60 seconds for the 400, this might be 7 minutes for the mile. But we're working on those repetitions. We're working on them being able to focus on a longer rep, right? 400 meters for a sprint side athlete can be a challenge. So when you're throwing them into a 600, it needs to be at a pace that can be completed and one that you can build success and build confidence from. Now, easy days deserve a progression as well. If I have a sprinter and I'm saying you're going to go run for half an hour today, once again, I'm not going to find myself a middle distance runner. That kid's going to disappear on me. So let's find ways to try to build up those easy runs in a manageable way. And your athlete might start off with something way more capable than this. I basically call these sends runs, and you don't even need to tell them. So you say, come on up, okay, you're going to go run for 10 minutes, go. And then they come back, and they're like, okay, coach, I'm done. I'm like, okay, hang out, get a little water. Okay, go for 12 minutes now. And then they come back. And next thing you know, if I do that a couple times, they're already at a half an hour of running. Or they might be up to 4 miles of running. Or you might build them up even longer than that. But it's once again in small chunks that an athlete can handle mentally and physically. But every time you have lots of reps of manageable chunks, it gives you a chance to say, you've done enough, you can do 2 more. What do you think? How are you feeling right now? Can we do a little bit extra? Okay, let's keep going. It gives you a chance to practice the art of coaching. Don't be a slave to the workout. Because you wrote it down on a piece of paper doesn't mean that's what has to get finished. Use their art, use your expertise, read the kid, talk with them, establish that relationship, and figure out if they need to do more or if they need to do less. Because the answer is almost always less. At least that's been my experience. So as we build up the 6-week block, I might do 2 weeks of 3 times around 8 minutes. It doesn't have to be perfect that. But over time, you want to get to a point where your athlete can go out for a 30 to 40 minute run continuously. But that can't happen overnight for someone who's never done it before. Now, that's not to say that you can't exclude continuous running completely, or that you have to exclude it. It's really important that you do have at least one continuous long run for a middle distance athlete. Now, this is not 15 miles that you would see in some cases in a high-level cross-country program. What it means is we're going to start around 30 minutes. This is your workout. It's not an easy day. It is a workout. And if you build it up like that, a kid's going to rise to that challenge and say, okay, I can do this. This is my challenge for today. It's not a recovery day. And I typically add around 5 minutes every week or two to build that kid up to around an hour. Truth be told, for a speed side middle distance runner, you really don't need much more than an hour every 2 weeks or so. So distance side, middle distance athlete, they might need that every single week, up to 90 minutes. but you got to know your kid, and we're not talking about that cross-country runner right now. So when you get to your second 6 weeks, how do you go from there? Well, remember, the second 6 weeks, you're typically going to have some races, right? Your races to start late February, early March. So use those races to replace some of the workouts that you're doing and be okay with that. But here's the progressions that I would consider. For 400 meters, look at your keeping your rest around a 4-to-1 ratio. So if I'm going to do some 200s and the 200 takes me 30 seconds, they need at least 2 minutes rest, how I typically work with it for this type of athlete. And in terms of volume, you're looking around 1,000 meters max total volume. So 5 times 200 is about as big as I'm going to get during this time of year. Remember, it's one workout. We don't want to try to totally destroy them. But keep the reps short so that they're manageable. I had a coach in college who I loved to death. And I remember, because we always did these notoriously big workouts. And we never got any better because we were always working too hard. But I'm out there doing 25 400s this day. And then our sprinters, and we had a great 4x4 for Division 3. We ran 3:08 for a Division 3 program, and that was awesome. But he was like, okay, guys, you guys are going to do 500s today, and you're going to do them in 60 seconds.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, you mean 60 seconds where I go through the 460? And the 400 runners are like, the coach was like, no. You're going to come through the 448, and you're going to finish at 60. I'm like, coach, we can't do that. And exactly, world record. Totally wrecked the workout because they were like, oh, coach screwed up. He made a mistake. How am I going to ever do 5 of these? Doesn't make sense. Keep 400 meter pace stuff short, okay, for the middle distance athlete. Otherwise, they're just going to be totally wiped out. Progression at 800 meter pace, closer to 2-to-1 rest to work ratio. Okay, so if I'm doing a rep, it takes around a minute, you get about 2 minutes rest. That's a rule of thumb. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's a guideline that I would use. You're looking at about 1,800 meters total volume. So you could do 6 times 300 meters at 800 meter pace. Or you could do 9 times 200 meters at 800 meter pace around this time. And no rep length longer than 300 to 400 meters at this phase still. So 4 times 400 meters at 800 meter pace is a really hard workout, even with 3 or 4 minutes rest. So you got to know your athlete, and you need to build to these levels very slowly. Where you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck, though, with this middle distance training for your speed side athlete is working at mile pace, because it's a manageable pace so you can get a lot of volume in. And one of the things that people always underestimate is how much of an aerobic contribution there is to the 800 and to the 1600 at the high school level. The slower the 800 is, far more aerobic it is. Most of your charts and research that has shown that the 800 is 50-50 aerobic anaerobic, or sometimes 40-60, showing even greater anaerobic component, is done with like a 145 half miler. None of our athletes are 145 half milers. Your body knows time, it doesn't know distance. So if I have a young lady who's running 240 for a half mile, or even 3 minutes for a half mile, that means the aerobic contribution is closer to what an elite male runs a mile in than what an elite male runs a half mile in. And for women, similarly so. So it's a challenging thing, but we always overestimate how much an anaerobic contribution there has to be. Our athletes are running far more aerobically, so the training needs to be focused on that. And we can steer in that direction. So with 1600 meter pace, I can work up to 2 to 3 miles total volume. So early on, your athletes are going to be closer to 3,200 meters worth, but I can build up to that with a short rest ratio and still have manageable rep lengths so we can get a lot of aerobic benefit from this. So for me, this is sort of the money pace. This is the sweet spot for a lot of the training where I really try to emphasize that speed side middle distance runner early on. Additionally, where you're going to see a lot of benefit is focusing on T-pace. This is a harder sell mentally, okay? Because most speed side athletes are not familiar with reps of this length or of this volume, but because they're so not used to it, they're going to adapt to it and see some improvements quickly. So you can get around 3 miles worth of volume at this much slower than mile pace, and you can build up to 8 to 1600 meter rep lengths. So for this, you get a mental benefit too. If you have a kid who can work up to doing 1200 meter repetitions or mile repeats, there is a mental strength that comes with that level of focus. So very important here. But notice our rest ratio has finally switched. So if I'm doing a rep that's around 6 minutes in length, I'm only going to get about 3 minutes of rest. So your work to rest ratio is different here with T-Pace. With our easy running, you're working towards trying to be at least 30 minutes continuous by this stage or by the end of this stage. So instead of doing those broken runs, I can do continuous runs. And with long runs, I'm continuing to build about 5 seconds in each cycle till we get to the top, around an hour. Now, a couple things I'll just note about the final 4 weeks. Remember you're racing, and those races count as workouts, so don't discount how important that is. You don't want to overwork your athlete. Big mistake everybody makes is all of a sudden doing tons of really hard workouts at the end of the season, when in most cases it's better to steer in the opposite direction. However, because the speed side middle distance athlete who's new is so new, I really continue to build training. I don't even think about a taper for the most part because they're getting better week after week. You've seen this progression week after week in the workouts and in races. So I don't all of a sudden say, okay, we're stopping workouts, we're stopping with the easy running, we're taking days off. I continue to build continuously. And while it may mean that I'm only at 98% of my potential and not 100%, if I aim for that taper and I screw it up, that athlete might compete at a much lower level at those important meets at the end of the year. So for me, for this kind of athlete, I continue building, continue training straight up into the end. Now, it's not to say I don't make changes. I certainly reduce the amount of quality by introducing more recovery days. If I was doing workout, easy day, long run, I might go workout, easy, workout. And by introducing that, which I call reducing the density of workouts, I am allowing the athlete to recover more while still building fitness. I maintain those easy runs. These easy runs are not hard, but the speed side middle distance athlete is still getting benefit from these because they're not as fully adapted to these shorter runs, these fully aerobic runs. So I don't eliminate this at all. And the one thing I do tend to move down on is these long runs. These can be mentally difficult, they can be physically difficult for this type of athlete. So I either only do 1 or 2 of them total or eliminate them entirely based on our racing schedule. Now, 2 other pieces I want to talk about before we finish up here is individualizing and organizing. Excel spreadsheets are your friend, and I have some that I can share with you if you want to take one to help you organize your team workouts. What I have created in these situations generally is a list of athletes who fall into this training group. I plug in what I believe or what their mile time is and maybe what their 800 meter time is, depending on how you want to focus on the training. And then the Excel spreadsheet shoots all this stuff out for you. So if you know you're doing 300s at 800 meter pace, all I'm going to have to do is copy and paste this onto another spreadsheet page and then print it out. Or all I have to do is highlight the color that I'm working with for that day. And all you do is you change what happens to be those people's PRs. Or in my case, I have my spreadsheet set up to find whatever is their PR. If I list 5 of their 800 meter times, it's going to search for what their minimum time is. So we get lost in so much time rewriting things by hand, trying to have all these workouts prepped, when if you set it up on the front end, investing a couple hours on Excel spreadsheets beforehand, you really just have to hit print and have everything you need for that day perfectly individualized for those kids. Now you can even sort it by time and then create your groups that way as well. So I can walk folks through this. There's also a tutorial with this on the Georgia Coaches Association website. You can download a cross-country version of this from the Georgia Coaches Association website as well, and we'll make sure we get that stuff to you guys. But these are super easy to work with and will give you so much time to be able to individualize and customize instead of just trying to wing it or handwrite everything. Additionally, with organization, it's important that you should put people into groups and have a plan ahead of time. Particularly in the 8 and the 16, where you might have different types of athletes, you want to know what kids are doing on what day. I know this sounds so basic and so simple, but like the strength training, start at the end of the year and work backwards and try to figure out exactly where people are supposed to fit in. So that if you have different groups doing different workouts, you can plan it accordingly so you can be with the athletes who need to be doing a workout that day, or you have it all in front of you so you don't have to be scrambling to write that workout right ahead of time. There's really nothing worse than showing up to practice and being like, what are we going to do today? Have it planned out, have it printed out, and be ready to go. So for me, this is just an example from 2017. I knew exactly what everybody was doing on what day, from an advanced group to a beginner's group, for whatever their event group happened to be. And I have no problem sharing any of this stuff, but this is just an example of how to stay organized, to stay on top of things, so you can be progressive. If I know we're doing 8 100s on Monday, at 400 pace, I know I can then put in the 800. And color coding them, for each of the training paces is another way of going. Now, basic race pacing strategy related to this type of athlete, the speed side middle distance athlete. In the 800, big mistake is going out too fast in the 800 and not really trying to provide the proper guidance for this athlete. So for me, easy rule of thumbs. First lap is your 400-meter PR, which all of these athletes will have done, okay? Or your date pace is the way you could think about it if they're a second-year athlete. And add 4 seconds for a guy, usually 5 seconds for a girl. And that's your starting point. And typically, what you're going to find early in the season, that second lap is going to be far slower. But as the season progresses, that second lap is going to get better and better as the year goes on. So be patient with that. But this is about the range you want to be in. Now, the cue I always give this type of athlete is they need to learn to push the third 200. Because the speed side athlete comes through the 400 and then all of a sudden, this is longer than it normally is. Yeah, that's right. It's 2 laps instead of 1. So if they focus on treating it like more like a 600, then the competitive spirit will take over the last 200. So this is a really big cue. Stay focused, stay on pace, push the third 200, and normally it starts to work itself out, instead of them backing off, slowing down, and relaxing. In the 1600, though, any way you slice it, the best way is even pacing. From the mile on up, every world record has been set with an even pace or a negative split pace. And it requires maturity, it requires patience, but it's really the best bet, as opposed to sending a kid out at a too fast pace and seeing them struggle, which is one of the things that's going to cause them not to like it. You want kids to be able to succeed. So for me, even pacing is the way to go. And then throughout the course of the season, based on as you see them progress in workouts, make calculated decisions on how to adjust that pace to set them up for an achievable goal. It's much better to see steady, consistent improvement than to say, I think you're ready for 70 seconds for the first lap when they're a 5:20 miler. So really important to focus on being as even as possible. Like what you find here, though, for the speed side middle distance athlete, the third lap, the third 25% is the hardest of this. And I always tell my kids, look, our goal is to hit the 800 at this pace as evenly as possible and then work that third lap. Because you're going to have something the final 400, because you're competitive, because you're a fighter. So let's focus on putting all of our energy into that third lap, and it will start to work itself out over time. So to pause and reflect, remember the general principles of training, okay? Be consistent. It's better to see a kid training year-round or throughout the entire season, injury-free. They're going to get better. Really important. Individualize when you can. Make sure kids are doing workouts that are tailored to their current fitness. Make sure it's tailored to their experience level, all of that. Be progressive. You can't do the same workout every single week and expect a different outcome. So build volume or reduce rest or increase paces. Play with those variables. And then focus on recoveries and focus on racing. Because ultimately, high schoolers want to race, they need to race, they're not pros. They're new at this. Give them that experience. In general, harder is not always better, both in terms of a workout for that day and a training block for that 2 weeks. Oftentimes, we just want to do something a little bit easier than you think you probably should. And finally, your quote, logistics win wars. In our case, planning ahead wins wars. This is pretty much everybody who's won a war or everyone's found success in coaching. You've got to think ahead, you've got to plan ahead so that you know that progression is going to happen. You know the kids are going to get the paces and the training blocks that they need. So plan ahead, stick to the plan where you can, and adapt when necessary. Thank you guys very much.